Today's episode is brought to you by Torero. Stop worrying if your peers have the environment to run your automation. Torero is a free tool that enables you to launch Python, playbooks, and plans against production while handling dependencies. Find out more at torero.dev. Torero.dev.
Hello and welcome to the Network Automation Nerds podcast, where we explore the latest in network automation from a practitioner's perspective. I'm your host, Eric Cho, a network engineer who loves everything about network automation. Today on the show, we welcome back Scott Robohn. Scott has 30+ years of experience in internet infrastructure and started his career back in the 90s and continue on, changed so many roles. In part one of our episode, we'll have links in the show notes. In part one, we talked about his background, his experience, how he gets to this point. In part two, we talk about network automation, NAV, which is AutoCon, how he came about, the present plan, as well as looking forward to the future, what the plans are. And today, for part three, the first ever 3-part series for network automation nerds, is we're going to talk about total network operation. This is a term that coined by Scott that, as far as I know, in AI in network engineering. So once again, welcome back to the show, Scott.
Thank you, Eric. Good to be here again.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, this is the first ever 3-part Network Automation Nerds podcast, just because when we're doing the planning, there's so much valuable stuff and you've done so much over 30 years and you got so much more gas left in the tank to go forward. And that's why we're having this third part. So, to start off, I think we'll start by just talking about AI because that's a hot topic today. A lot of people are nervous about it. And I'm interested in your thoughts on AI in network engineering.
So I started thinking most directly on this probably a year and a half ago. I started out being more on the nervous side. Is this going to be Skynet? And I know it's not going to be Skynet, but,
right.
Terminator reference for those who haven't watched the movies in a while.
You mean all 8 of them? The
right.
Terminator 1, 2, 3, and plus all the side movies? Yeah.
Come with me if you want to live.
Yes, exactly.
So I knew I needed to dive in and learn. Shout out to Javier Antique, who wrote, I'm going to get the title wrong, but it's basically AI and ML for network engineers and cloud engineers, something to that effect. And it was the perfect starting point for someone who understands network engineering and how AI and machine learning tools can be used in a network engineering context. Really just kind of broke the ice for me and got me thinking about it. As NAF came together, it seemed obvious to me that, AI in network engineering as an extension, is a superset of automation. We're going to get some great talks on AI and network engineering.
Oh, no kidding. You have some sneak peek or?
I'm still referring to Denver. And
okay.
I'll say, I was disappointed. I thought there would be more, but I rationalized it the following way. It's early. People are just starting to play with things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you think September, October into November, when people were creating content and putting things together, the submissions that were there related to AI were really vendor driven. That's not a criticism. It shows that there's not a lot of AI for network engineering that's gotten out into production yet, because we were very focused on real stories. Okay, that's okay. That's just where we are, the state of the state, as it were. There's still really interesting work being done, right? People are playing with using ChatGPT to analyze packet captures, to generate configs,
right?
To come up with ideas for research or ideas on how to troubleshoot a problem. Those real ad hoc ways of using AI. That's great. That's creative. Look at John Capobianco at Cisco. Have you ever seen any of his stuff? He has no fear, and he's willing to try it and see what people think and get other people to try it. We need people like him to keep doing what he's doing. How much of it is going to be useful? 10%? 5%? That's okay. If you look at product lifecycle and all the vendors we deal with, 5% is probably pretty good.
Yeah, 2 things I want to double click on. The first is what you talked about vendor, and that's always been the way that network engineering has been. Is always the vendor. Well, let me take back because, you reminded me of kind of the histories of network engineering. So initially, maybe it was the telcos, the AT&Ts of the world, when they're huge, and they would come out with, AT&T University and AT&T Research, right? They would come out with the latest in technology. But when they were broken up, now they don't have the resources and become vendor who was driving those innovations. So what you talked about on, vendors were the first ones that start embedding AI in their equipment, in their system use cases. That's great. And that's an observation that you had. So was I. But we need to step in, like users, and we need to step in to kind of give our inputs as well. Otherwise, we get back into previously what we had before, was all vendor-driven innovation. Not making a judgment on that. I'm just saying that's one of the things I observed as well. And second was, yes, John has been fearless. He has been very passionate, and he just have this bundle of energy. And I actually invited him to talk at Network to Code as well, to talk about, I think he calls it Packet Buddy, to have AI analyze the Wireshark's packet captures.
Yep, that's pretty amazing, right? And somebody's been training those models.
Right.
Somebody else already tried it, right? That's how some of that data already got in there. So that ad hoc, people are experimenting with different things with the chat-based tools and other things. That's one stream of work that's happening. And I'm really interested to see, what those conversations look like at AutoCon 1 in Amsterdam around AI in particular. But there's also the vendors, the technology suppliers that are starting to embed AI into their ops tools. I think Juniper Mist is a great example. They were really early using machine learning for Wi-Fi operations.
Right.
Companies like Selector.ai are doing really good work with reducing data down into actionable intelligence from volumes of streaming telemetry that are beyond human cognitive load. And not to just put that all on Selector. There's a company, Ogterra, they're doing certain things. Kentic is doing certain things in this area. I don't want to play favorites. There's lots of really interesting work here in terms of embedding AI into the tools. Look, I'm a Marvel movie guy, and I'm a sci-fi guy, so I can give you a Marvel example or I can give you a sci-fi example. Actually, Eric, since you asked, I'll give you both.
Yes.
The Marvel example is Tony Stark and the Iron Man suit. AI is the Iron Man suit. And yes, Jarvis was the AI, operator, that helped Tony Stark, quite literally. It adds to the operator's powers.
Mm-hmm.
The sci-fi example is the second Alien movie, Aliens, with Ripley at the end of the movie and the big dock loader exoskeleton. Again, AI for her is that dock loader, making her able to defeat the creepy, weird alien hybrid. You still need a human at the wheel, right?
Right.
But it can really augment human capability. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind here for the near term with AI tools.
Yeah, I don't know, because Jarvis, if I remember correctly, he eventually became an Avenger as well, right?
He did. He became Vision. That's
right.
right.
He became Vision, and
Yes.
he was still part of the good guys, but he kind of evolved as well. And kind of, I guess 30% of me is still in that nervous camp where, when you talked about that, I go, okay, well, yeah, but Jarvis eventually become, like a mind of his own. But it's kind of interesting how it's evolving and how it's gonna turn out. I don't think anybody knows, but there's a lot of excitement around it, a lot of efforts. And with this much hype, with this much effort, yeah, I think there's something that's going to come out of it. We'll just have to wait and see. And that's all contribute to it as well, right? Put in our thoughts and give your opinion. Don't stay on the sideline, and just work on it, and starting with just supporting some of these projects that you mentioned and give your thoughts toward it.
And to your point of, you've still got that 30% caution there.
Right.
I think that's reasonable. I'm not suggesting to anyone that just because you can do something with AI means you should do something with it. And AI is just the technology. You could take that out and replace that with other types of technologies. I think we've seen enough. I won't stray too far into the sociological. With the rapid onset of social media and the impacts that it's had on mental health for all sorts of people, there's an example of probably some technologies that went way too far, too fast without us thinking them through first, that we don't want the same thing to happen with AI. And maybe the genie's out of the bottle and it's already too late. But thoughtfulness and caution are definitely warranted, with any brand new technology like this.
Yeah, well, one thing for sure, though, because if you recall just a couple of years ago on, distributed financing, Bitcoins, blockchain,
Yep.
It's very different from that, because I also hear people comparing AI as a bubble to those that are, like the distributed financing, Bitcoins. When I ask people about their opinion, they don't even have a digital wallet, right? Like,
Right.
So that is very different as to AI today. Everybody's using ChatGPT. Everybody could see the benefits of it. So I don't think it's going to be the same trajectory as far as the bubble. But at the same time, there's a lot of energy, whether that's nervous energy, that's real energy, that's yet to be seen. There's this interesting idea that I've heard for the first time just by chatting with you and collaborating on this episode. It's called total network operations. So tell us more about that. What is this idea around total network operations?
For sure. I'll also take this back to the AutoCon Zero event where one of our keynote speakers was a guy named John Willis, who has been a significant contributor to and developer of DevOps. And thankfully, through Jeremy Schulman, we were able to get John to be one of our keynote speakers. And he had some incredible things to say about reading outside your field, thinking more holistically and not in silos, and thinking about how things work from a system perspective, going all the way back to manufacturing engineering principles that people like W. Edwards Deming put forward. And I was challenged by that. I started reading some of the stuff that was suggested. And I had this thought, there are a lot of us in the network engineering world that, well, we're sick and tired of hearing about DevOps. And, not completely fair, right? But there's a different filter for network engineering and operations, right? There are paradigms that work so well for the application world, system administration world, and compute world that that's what DevOps is for. And that makes complete sense.
Right.
But I don't have, a dev, a test, and a production, that I can just copy and paste, and push from one to the other. I'm constrained by the pets that I have in my network, not cattle. Those routers have names for a reason, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that we should treat them just like pets, but the physicality and the gazintas and the gazatas interfaces, right? The places where we plug Ethernet cables in and fiber in, that doesn't have an analog in a cloud environment or a DevOps environment. So I was motivated to say, what if I could take principles from Deming and apply them more directly to network engineering and operations, not processing them through the DevOps filter? I think we could get rid of a lot of the objections that some people have that feel like this DevOps stuff, the suit doesn't fit right. Stop trying to force it on me. There's still benefit we could get from it if it were more directly applied to what it means to operate a network. Does that make sense?
I do want to dig deeper into that. So
Sure.
What you're saying is the total network operations is a extension of, say, the total quality control. And I do identify with some of what you talked about on the system engineering and developer mindset. There's a reason why they're different disciplines, right? Like from network engineering, just the immutability of the networking gears is a little bit different. Nowadays, you could have a cloud setup that goes from the ground up and use your Terraforms and everything would be the same from the ground up. However, in networking, there's usually not a good time for you to reload the switches and expect it to come back to the state and without any interruptions. So I do agree on the separation of concerns and separate tracks, but I'm curious as to your idea about getting rid of the DevOps thinking, right? So it's not a perfect match for network operations, but can we take some of that into our own learning?
Definitely yes to what you said. It's a matter of how we take it.
Okay.
So I didn't describe what TNOps is. I only told you how I thought about getting there. So when we talk about that a little bit, and then we can see, where this goes with, how much of DevOps is reusable for network ops. I break this into two big buckets. Well, actually, just to step back, I've been thinking about this in terms of developing a framework for network operations.
Okay.
It can't be just Scott Robohn's ideas. It can't just be Eric's ideas. It needs to be crowdsourced, have decent input. And what I've defined is really a starting point. So I basically said, here are two things to think about in network operations. Number one, your entire ops tech stack needs to work together. You can't treat automation as a silo. You can't treat your multi-cloud networking as a silo. You can't treat your AI tools as a silo. You need to think about the integrations, literal and figurative, across all those tech disciplines. And they better tie off to business requirements or mission requirements in military environments. Got to be a system. And that goes all the way back. This is, full circle of life for me, talking about that systems thinking framework that, goes back to my formal education. It's got to work together. Principle number one. Principle number two, for ops, you need to proactively investigate new tools and tech for your ops stack. Things are happening too fast for you to just take the latest upgrade or get what's handed to you strictly from the network architecture team, even though you probably should implement what you're handed from the network architecture team. And I think AI is the biggest example of this, to go back to our conversation earlier in the podcast, right? Don't just let it happen. Maybe you should think through some use cases, do some experiments, right? Those small batch experiments, it's another key principle from Deming. Don't set up a whole production run before you know what it's going to look like. Try a little experiment, see what the results are. Change a little bit, try another experiment, and so forth. AI kind of takes the oxygen out of the room for the tech stack discussion now. But I think automation and multi-cloud networking are two that are really close behind it for solid network operations today. And there are other disciplines too. I've got a slide deck on this. I've presented it at a couple NUGs. By the time this airs, I will have done this in Minnesota, New York, and Virginia. And this is not the last word on it. I have been socializing it with some close contacts and getting good feedback, all of it constructive, but some of it being, no, Scott, I don't think that's the way we should go on that. And I want to go broader with it. So I'm investigating the possibility of basically doing maybe a limited podcast series or maybe a longer podcast series to bring in ops leaders and frontline ops people and the vendors that support those communities to shine light on some of the issues here. I could take the exact same approach of, maybe I should do a survey on the state of network operations, and that would probably be valuable. And I intend to do something like that. But I think podcasting as a mechanism is such a great way to get ideas out quickly. It's not as permanent as putting it in a document and memorializing it, but hearing what people have to say in their own words from their own operations experience, it's something I'm really excited about, and more to come. There may be more information about that by the time this airs.
A quick sponsor break to hear about Torero. Torero is a free tool from the network automation and orchestration folks at iTential. What does Torero do? Torero builds an execution environment around your Python scripts, Ansible playbooks, or OpenTofu plans so that you can run them as a service. This means that you don't have to worry whether or not your peer will be able to run your automation. You're getting rid of the "it works on my laptop but nowhere else" problem. Because once that automation exists as a Torero service, all the dependencies have been handled. I worked through the Torero Hello World demo, and it was straightforward. I installed Torero on an Ubuntu box. Linux and Mac are both supported, including Apple Silicon, and connected Torero to a public GitHub repo that I created for the test. In that repo was a simple Python script and a requirements.txt. I told Torero to create a service around that Python script, and Torero read the requirements file and built the service. Now the script is executable via Torero Run. Torero can be run on a single machine your team shares in local mode or in a server mode that dispatches automation jobs to Torero clients. Build your automation, turn it into a Torero service, and share it with your team. Download free Torero at torero.dev. That's Torero.dev.
I dig the idea on system level thinking, and I also dig the idea of short iterations of trial and just development cycles on that. So I think those two are fundamentals, and absolutely agreed on that. I guess the clarification I would want more is on the main use cases, but like you said, there's more to come. This is a iterative process that you're gathering inputs, constructive feedbacks on. So I look forward to the next step, but definitely system level thinking. I think the challenge is we all came from our baggages and biases and self-selected viewpoints. So I think it's very hard to find any given person that have the total system level thinking. So the more we could hook into each other's strength and rely on other people, the better. And that is where that framework would come in for me, is to discover my blind spots on DevOps or development thinking. And maybe I could contribute back in some of the network engineering and community as well.
That's my perspective on this completely, right? I haven't been in a deep operations role for quite some time. And I'd have to say it was probably my TAC experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot's changed since then. I have some ideas They might not be the best ideas. They're probably not the best ideas. So let's bring in people who have done this at small scale and large scale and just start the conversation. That's my goal. We'll see how things go in the next few months.
I'm sure it'd be great, but to your point, I think we do need everybody to contribute and everybody's viewpoint. One thing after, working in the cloud environment for 10 years for AWS and Microsoft, when I came out, it was so surprising to me how I was living in a bubble. Not everybody is hyperscaler and not everybody have, the same kind of challenges and rewards or resources that the hyperscaler does. In fact, the majority of people don't. And for me, coming back to that was refreshing and it was eye-opening. And so I do think all of us, regardless of how involved you're with the community, you still have so many blind spots that you need to uncover.
For sure. I have a list of over 100 people that I would like to bring on. We're not going to
Oh
do
my
100
God.
episodes. I won't get that kind of commitment right away.
Yeah.
But, to your point there is the bubble that is cloud, right? And that operational environment. And there are things that work well there that are totally different for the team running a small or medium enterprise network.
Right.
That has cloud connectivity. Here's the thing. Both are important. One size does not fit all, right? I need to figure out, okay, well, what works for those traditional appliance-based networking devices versus what's happening from a networking perspective in the cloud, where you have this abstraction layer that hides what's really happening with the physical infrastructure underneath it.
That's right.
You don't get to see the underlay.
Right.
The underlay matters. The underlay doesn't work. The overlay doesn't work.
Right.
And that is a big difference between cloud networking environments and more traditional or appliance-based. I need a better phrase than appliance-based networking. But when I say that, people seem to understand, what I mean there.
Sure.
I'm not saying one is better than the other. They're just different environments, and we need to figure out, okay, what do we use where for what purposes?
Yeah, I mean, you brought out David Sin, and I remember one episode, he and, a bunch of other illuminaries, Dinesh Dutt and Yvonne and everybody, like they were on heavy networking on talking about the sources of truth.
Sure.
And, that was a great episode if you're interested on, just knowing a different perspective and just seeing the challenges on handling the underlay for infrastructure versus the on-prems. And it's not just the small and medium-sized shop, it's just enterprise in general, right? Like we've worked with large enterprises that span over globals and they still have their own unique challenges. And I just think there's a lot of untapped areas within network engineering, and that's what's exciting about it. And we saw part of that in NAV and in all the presentations. And now you're bringing this TNOps. So I look forward to what came out of it.
Yeah, I look forward to it too. It's a learning exercise.
Yeah.
My thought has shifted a little bit from, well, here's a proposed framework to, okay, here's a potential framework that needs a lot more input and will get refined with more and more input from, for lack of a better phrase, best practices.
Yeah.
Let's see what people bring to the table and what's been working in their environments. I feel like I want to treat it like investigative reporting.
The 60 minutes of network engineering.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I've had preliminary conversations with initial candidates. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, but to a person, everyone I've talked with, it's always been very serious and very direct. There are no marketing level conversations in any of this. These are the people that have dealt with real issues that keep the network working, that don't get the credit for it. They're not appreciated by corporate management. They don't realize how broad their shoulders are. And, it's ironic, right? Because this is your last line of defense. So I don't want to get really attitudinal about that. I call that out because certain people in network organizations get lots of attention from vendors and others do not. And I would love to shine a little light on the groups that get less attention.
That's an interesting point. And the last question I'll ask on this was just because you tap into it and you talked about maybe starting a podcast to provide these information versus maybe a academic paper. So I'm wondering, what's your thought on the consuming content, right? Like, because after the end of COVID, we do see a lower level of consumptions on podcasts. And for me, because I'm one of those that tracks book sales volumes, and there's probably a 20-30% drop in readership in general, right? Just by correlating the Amazon book ranking to the amount of book that's sold. So I know for a fact that there's, maybe 20-30% drop in all the mediums. So what's your take on that? I mean, is podcast or the other, how do you consume information? How do you learn?
Podcasts and audiobooks are my top two sources, probably in that order of how I consume content and learn. I love to walk and run for exercise, and I like to keep my mind busy. So I'm always listening to something. If it's a run, it's not a serious audiobook. If I really need to absorb as close to 100% of the content as possible, I'm sitting down and listening, or I'm actually reading a physical book. For example, I'm reading the Elon Musk biography by Walter Isaacson right now. And that's a traditional reading experience. I love the feel and the smell of the paper, but that's probably number three, reading, physical books right there. The, podcast versus associated video content, putting it on YouTube.
Right.
I know some people like that. I justify YouTube Premium as a training expense for me. I will use YouTube Premium to go and if there's something that I need 10 minutes on to try and figure something out, like these bits in EVPN or VXLAN, I can usually find a video that's going to get me to it really quickly. And I pay for Premium so that when I lock my phone, at least the audio will still be playing. I treat it like a podcast at that point. And I hadn't thought about the consumption changes since COVID. I mean, I'm not trying to sell any books, so I haven't been watching it that carefully. But yeah, I'm sure that's an interesting impact. How are you dealing with that? Or is it just, it is what it is? There's not much you can do about it.
I think the COVID actually put a spike to it. So it was on the downtrends anyways, on the readership for physical books. Like you said, there's so many choices now. And I do think some methods are better fitted for others. Like, for example, if you want to look at an example, EVPN or MPLS, it's better to consume it over the video format and, go apply yourself versus a book, because it's always hard to, going back and forth or having a book on the side. So I think it was on a downward trajectory anyways. And both the podcast and the readership had a spike in COVID. So it was an anomaly, not a norm. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any way that we could deal with it besides just meet people where they are. And that's why, sometimes we're putting this on video, sometimes we're doing podcasts. It's just the consumption model have changed and we just got to shift with it.
An interesting little aside on this. One of the things that my job flexibility has allowed me to do this past year is I've actually been teaching an advanced physics class at a high school.
Oh, no kidding. Wow. Nice.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And I'm doing a horrible job because there's so much good video content on what's happening in physics, quantum level and in the universe. I could spend so much time curating and saying, hey, class, look at this. And the video content in the hard sciences, arenas like this, is so much more effective than the textbook, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I have to default to the textbook because it's curated and it's easy to use. But I wish I had the time and energy to expand this and use so much more video content. You can represent so much more of what's going on with new research.
I agree. Like I said, I have kids who are just, learning and getting ready for college. And so, you see these world-class professors, CS50 from Harvard or Neil deGrasse, and all these world-class scientists who is willing to explain things so that a dumb 5-year-old like myself could understand. And so that's amazing. But that also adds to the digital divide and, the haves and have-nots, which is a whole other episode.
For sure. Yep.
Yeah. Well, again, I think, we could just go on and on about this, but we have to cut off at some point. So this is part 3 of our episodes. And I do think that we'll invite you back pretty soon, Scott, on all of your experiences on, maybe your newest podcast and the NAF, maybe a year later, what you learned. And so I thank you again for being on the show and spending this time with us. Where can people find you and follow your work?
Well, let me first say thank you for having me here. It's been completely enjoyable. I can't wait to share what we learned from AutoCon 1 or maybe, after AutoCon 2. Let's see how that goes. LinkedIn is the best place to find me and connect with me. Pop me a message, send me a connection request. I love our conversations about community. It's great to see what other people are doing and being able to collaborate. I also use X. I have tried some of the other platforms and they're okay. There's still a center of mass on X that I've just found really useful. And I'm Scott Robohn, one word on X.
Yeah, again, you got to meet people where they are, right? And so far, despite the various efforts, I still don't see people shifting to other platforms. And there's like the economies of scale, and certainly that places a center of gravity towards that, at least for the 140 character platform.
Exactly.
Well, thanks again for being here. Thank you, listeners, for listening to this episode of Network Automation Nerds. If you have any feedback for network automation, for Scott, for this episode, send us some follow-ups at packetpushers.net/fu. We really want to hear from you. Check out our websites at packetpushers.net to find other network engineering focused podcasts, blogs, YouTube videos, and join our Slack channels. Last but not least, remember that too much network automation will never be enough.